Americans for Prosperity is an economic policy group. We fight tax increases. We fight expansions of government. I even sometimes tell people we're free market, zealots, and that's really what we are. And we've had a lot of work to do on the state level. Y'all know how bad the state budget was, and we know how state and local governments sometimes are expanding their authority and increasing the upfront of property rights. But we also do a lot of work on the national level to try to control runaway spending and earmarks and things like that. And I am pleased tonight to introduce to you a champion of the taxpayer in Washington, somebody who is a good person, somebody who can fire me tomorrow. So we want to give him a good round of applause. But somebody who really is taking the faces of taxpayers like us in the room and taking it to Congress and saying there are folks out there that believe in limited government and free markets. And without any further ado, I introduce to you the President of Americans for Prosperity, Tim Phillips.
Well, good evening. It is great to be here. I was telling some folks in the back of the room that my name is Tim Phillips. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I'm really here to help. They almost threw me out of the room, so I said, no, I'm not from the government now. But it's great to be here. I grew up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, not very far down the road, a few hours. And it's good to come home, frankly, to the Carolinas. You can't get barbecue like this in the Washington, D.C. area. Sadly, I'm here to attest that. I've tried a number of places, but so it's good to be home. Dallas mentioned Americans for Prosperity and our mission. And I tell you, our mission is really crystal clear. It's to make sure that in every public policy battle, our side is heard. And what do I mean by our side? I was talking to Senator Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, who's a real champion for our free market values, and he said, Tim, every day that we're in Washington, groups come to us, and the message is always the same, no matter who they are. Senator, we need more money, we need more programs, more regulation, more taxes, or the world's going to end as we know it. And that's literally what he and every other member of Congress hears week in and week out. I bet you can probably relate to that on the council. And usually, the senator told me, they're funded, these groups are funded at least in part with our tax dollars. And that's what we're facing. And so our job at Americans for Prosperity is to get folks like you from all walks of life to go to their elected officials with a very simple message. Stop the spending increases, stop the growth of government, stop the tax increases that take more and more of our hard-earned dollars, and respect the economic freedoms that our Constitution offers and that as Americans we ought to have. That's our message in a nutshell. And it's a message that we have to repeat over and over and over to our elected officials on a consistent basis, or we're going to lose. We're going to lose really control of the size of our government, which unfortunately right now we've really done. How many have heard of this bridge to nowhere in Alaska, the infamous bridge to nowhere? About 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I have to admit, and this is an embarrassing admission to make, but I really didn't understand what an earmark was, one of these pork-barrel earmarks that now are so familiar to us. And then we heard about this bridge to nowhere. They were going to spend $223 million to build a bridge from the mainland of Alaska to an uninhabited island. And then they were going to connect that uninhabited island with another island that had 51 people on it. And that was going to cost $223 million. And then there was an uproar ensued, and Senator Coburn, who I mentioned a moment ago, forced a vote in the Senate. It was the first time in the recorded Senate history that an earmark had been pulled out by a member of the Senate, because they have rather a chummy club in the U.S. Senate, and they forced a vote on it. Now, something as crazy, and by the way, I have been to Alaska to look at where this bridge would be built, and I can tell you it's crazy to build this bridge. So when Senator Coburn forced a vote, I'm sure most of you assume, like I assume, that he won the vote, right? He lost, and he didn't just lose, he went down in flames. He lost 85-13. Think about that. 85 senators said, hey, wait a minute. I know we're fighting a war on terror. I know we have so many other priorities, but I want to make sure we spend $223 million on this bridge in Alaska to nowhere. And Americans for Prosperity, we thought that was nuts. And we began digging into these earmarks. And we found that in 2005, this was 2006 at the time, there were 15,877 earmarks that had been passed by Congress for over $60 billion, with a B, $60 billion. The other disturbing thing we found was that Republicans on earmarks were just as bad as Democrats. Both parties were doing it. So we did the only thing we could do. We didn't have a few $1 million laying around for a TV blitz. So we got in an RV and we drove to the site of the 50 most outrageous earmarks in America. 37 states, 12,000 miles. My wife and I have 4 kids. I told her, honey, those kids will never get an RV vacation. I'm sick of being in an RV. But we did it. And some of the sites we saw were simply nuts. Just 4 or 5 of the most outrageous earmarks. We went to the site where they were spending $2.6 million of your tax dollars on a virtual reality spray paint simulator. Let me repeat that because it bears repeating. A virtual reality spray paint simulator where for $2.6 million they teach people how to spray paint. Now look, I'm a Virginia Tech grad. That means I'm probably not the brightest guy on the block. But I think with maybe some Krylon paint and some plywood, we can probably teach that a little bit cheaper. We went to Auburn, Alabama, where they have the catfish genome mapping project going on for only $500,000 of your tax dollars, where they are, quote, using federal dollars to create the master catfish. Now look, I'm a Southerner. Believe me, I am for there being a master catfish, but not when I'm spending $500,000 of our tax dollars. One of the craziest ones was in Akron, Ohio. We went to Akron University, where there is actually a college program paid for with your tax dollars, $500,000 to teach students how the federal government could spend less money. $500,000 so that people can sit around and discussing how to spend less of your money. We went to one more place, and I'll move on. But we went to New Mexico, where there's a transportation museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that has gotten over $3 million of your money over the course of 3 years. Now we were expecting to see a nice big museum. At $3 million, you should be able to buy a nice museum. We pull up with the media in tow and a group of grassroots activists with us, and it was basically an abandoned warehouse. They had taken millions of dollars of tax money and done nothing with it. It was just an abandoned way. It wasn't open. It didn't have hours. And we call it the museum that doesn't exist for $3 million of your money. So these earmarks are simply an outrage, and they're really the tip of the iceberg. We began calling for reforms, and they passed. If you ever wonder, can you really make a difference? Me getting involved as a citizen, can I really make a difference? Let me tell you the difference you made. We began doing rallies, news conferences. We ended up raising money and doing TV ads and direct mail in different districts around the country. And Congress was forced to pass 2 reforms. 2 reforms this past January they passed, and they're in law right now. The first one said that if you want an earmark with federal tax dollars, you as a member of Congress have to put your name to that earmark. Now, that may sound like common sense to you and me. If you want to get money for an earmark, put your name to it. But believe it or not, earmarks were anonymous until this year. Now they have to put their name to it, so we can tie these earmarks, these boondoggles, to individual members of Congress and hold them accountable. The second reform that was passed, due to grassroots pressure from folks like you, requires there be public disclosure of all earmarks before they can be voted on, in the Congress. Again, that sounds like common sense, right? We're going to have a budget, we're going to stick earmarks in it, surely you're going to tell the public before the vote. They weren't doing that till this year. That's a result directly of grassroots pressure. And that's the kind of difference you can make. And that's what we work on very hard at Americans for Prosperity.